Hello, world and universe. Welcome to the Trevor Donald Experience. Manifest your truth. And if you're new to the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. And for all my continued followers, I want to say thank you. And this is an opinion-based video channel where I try to open your eyes and ears up to some of the travails and tribulations that take place throughout our cities, our states, our country, and sometimes around the world. And this particular story has to do with our city sheriff's department. There's been a lot of controversy with this newly elected sheriff, Alfred Montgomery. And just to take you back, he beat Vernon Betts, who had been the sheriff for a long time. As a matter of fact, Alfred Montgomery had worked as a city sheriff under Vernon Betts, and Vernon Betts had fired him years ago. And then upon this new election last fall, Alfred Montgomery had won the sheriff's election, and now he's a new sheriff. But prior to going in there, there's been controversy. There was controversy and a lot of obstacles with the outgoing sheriff, Vernon Betts, and the incoming sheriff, Alfred Montgomery. Vernon Betts had banned Montgomery from coming into the sheriff's department's building prior to taking over in January. And Alfred Montgomery, the new sheriff, decided that he was going to terminate at least a dozen sitting sheriffs upon him taking over the office this past January. As you know, the St. Louis City Police Department is understaffed. St. Louis City correctional officers are understaffed, and we need more sheriffs. So, and to add to that declining number, Alfred Montgomery decided that he was going to get rid of at least a dozen sheriffs under his new leadership. But also, here recently, he just terminated another sheriff. And there is a ton of controversy over this one because this was over a roll of dice. And then there's a third storyline where it's allegedly the sheriff's department had detained the deputy correctional officer. The sheriffs had detained the Justice Center's acting commissioner, Tammy Ross, under an alleged incident that involved an inmate and a sheriff with an alleged assault, which is against the law. The sheriffs are to be in control of maintaining and transporting prisoners to and from court, and they're not there to police necessarily the city justice commissioner, let alone arrest her. So there's been several things that have been taking place in our city jail system. And let's talk about what this latest controversy is all about. Here we go. St. Louis sheriff made deputy roll dice to keep his job and then fired him days later. The bizarre allegations about Sheriff Alfred Montgomery are bolstered by recordings shared by former deputy Tony Kirchner, an aldermanic candidate whose law enforcement background is a key part of his campaign, was fired last month from St. Louis Sheriff's Office after a set of bizarre circumstances in which he says he was made to roll golden dice to keep his job. That's right, he had to roll some dice. Tony Kirchner, who is currently challenging Ann Schweitzer for a seat on the St. Louis Board of Aldermen, says that on January 22nd, he came to talk to Sheriff Alfred Montgomery about taking an extended leave. Kirchner's father had just died. He had the campaign to focus on. Kirchner says that previous conversations he had had with Sheriff Montgomery led him to believe this sort of leave wouldn't be an issue. That's now how things went. And so this is what Kirchner said. He breaks out a pair of golden dice. Kirchner tells St. Louis Magazine, 2 dice, they're gold. He says, I'll tell you what, Tony, if you can roll a 7, you can take your leave. If you don't, you have to resign. This is so bizarre if this is true. On Tuesday, Sheriff Montgomery flatly told St. Louis Magazine no when asked if Dice were involved in Kirchner's dismissal. He did say that the previous sheriff, Vernon Betts, left behind a pair of golden dice that staffers came across while cleaning up. The previous administration left a bunch of different stuff here. We were cleaning out the office. There were some dice on the table, and I'm talking to him, and Tony was playing with the dice, Montgomery says. That was it. It was something that was on the table. He says Kirchner was fidgeting with them as they spoke. However, on Wednesday, Kirchner shared with St. Louis Magazine the audio of that interaction that seems to bolster his version of events. That means Tony Kirchner's version of events. What sounds like a pair of dice hitting a table can be heard, followed by Montgomery saying, "You got 2 tries. Roll a 7 and we'll go on with whatever you want." In another audio clip, Kirchner protested he did nothing wrong, seemingly indicating the dice. Montgomery says, "That's your wild card. You can do whatever you want to with that. 2 tries you get." Kirchner seemingly demure. Rolling this, I understand, but why should this have to do with me keeping my job? Before I make bad decisions, I always roll these dice, Sheriff Montgomery said, and it always gives me good advice every time. You can then hear the dice being shaken and rolled by Kirchner, and he says he rolled a 7 on the second try. Give him whatever leave time he needs, Sheriff Montgomery can be heard saying on the tape. We'll go from here. Montgomery, who took office in January, Sheriff Montgomery, has been mirrored in an unrelated controversy also, which I mentioned in the beginning of this video. Last Friday, he ordered the City Justice Center's acting commissioner, Tammy Ross, to be put in handcuffs and briefly detained. The city sheriff does not run the jail, as in the case elsewhere in Missouri, but his office does control detainee transportation between the facility and city courts. It has been widely reported that the FBI is investigating the incident between Montgomery and Ross. So not only did the Sheriff Montgomery have this issue with Kirchner and firing him over these dice, he also detained the city acting commissioner, Tammy Ross, over an incident. Montgomery was in jail that day investigating an alleged essay assault committed by a sheriff's deputy on a female detainee. Sheriff Montgomery later told KMOV that the city's Department of Public Safety had authorized him to interview the detainee who was the victim of the alleged assault. The department's head, Charles Coyle, responded to that interview by issuing a statement saying in part, Sheriff Montgomery lied repeatedly. At no time and under no circumstance did I give a directive to allow Sheriff Montgomery and or his staff to interview the detainee, the female detainee. The Golden Dice incident with Kirchner predates the controversy by about 3 weeks. On January 22nd, Kirchner says he was in Montgomery's office in the Civil Courts building. There, Kirchner thought to talk about a leave of absence. When Montgomery told Kirchner he had seen photos of Kirchner campaigning while in his uniform, which is barred by state law. Sheriff Montgomery said Kirchner had only 2 choices: to resign or be fired. So he's firing him because he was campaigning for the alderman position while in uniform, and that's against state law. Kirchner protested that those were neighborhood meetings he attended in uniform, not campaign stops. Montgomery's predecessor, Vernon Betts, encouraged deputies to go in uniform to meetings to be a presence in the community, Kirchner tells St. Louis Magazine. Kirchner says, I'm a fair guy. I'm very fair. Montgomery Montgomery says, Kirchner, I'm a fair guy. I'm very fair. Montgomery, Sheriff Montgomery is heard saying in the tape provided by Kirchner. Here's one option. Here's two options. This is when what sounds like dice hitting a table can be heard. There's three options. You got two tries. Roll a 7 and we'll go with whatever you want. This is your wild card. You can't fall from the bottom, Montgomery is heard saying. Presumably referring to the dice, he says. You can do whatever you want with that right there. That's where we are. That's the best deal I can give you, Sheriff Montgomery told Kirchner. Audio captures some back and forth as Kirchner pushed back. Then he seemingly affected his fate and rolled. He says his first roll was a 6, his second roll was a 7. Kirchner thought he was good to go until about a week later when this reporter called him seeking comment about him being fired from the sheriff's office. As far as I know, I'm still with the sheriff's office, Kirchner said at the time, calling the situation bizarre. Last Monday, Kirchner posted on Facebook that his 12-year career as deputy sheriff may come to an end. I use the word may because despite my repeated inquiries, my employment status has not been fully disclosed to me. Yet it has been disclosed to the media, he wrote. The sheriff's office has not commented publicly on Kirchner's termination other than to say he is no longer employed by the office. However, a letter recently drafted by an attorney for the sheriff states that Kirchner was discharged for, among other things, working secondary during office hours, campaigning for elected office in uniform, letting papers expire, and not properly serving papers in his work for outside services. The letter was drafted as part of a legal battle over a house in the Shaw neighborhood that was sold at auction in July 2024 after its owner, Marilyn Hinton, accrued delinquent taxes. Hinton has claimed she was not properly served notice that her house was going to be sold. She wrote to the judge that she has been in the house since 1977, while acknowledging she got behind on her taxes. She says she only learned of the sale when a neighbor informed her. Usually for these types of cases, the sheriff's office has interceded on Hinton's behalf. On February 6, a court filing made by the office states that under Betts, the sheriff's office did in fact fail to properly give notice to Hinton. Those filings put a good deal of the blame on Kirchner, saying that among other things, he failed to post proper notice on Hinton's property. Kirchner says it was his opponent, current Ward 1 Alderwoman Schwitzner, who sent Montgomery the photos of him in sheriff's uniform at the neighborhood meeting. She doesn't dispute it, the Alderwoman. I told many people what he was doing. It's against state law, she says, referring to a statute about police not campaigning while in uniform. Schwitzner says she even had constituents hand her highlighted printouts of the law. Schwitzner shared with St. Louis Magazine a photo she took of Kirchner in a sheriff's hat, speaking at a neighborhood meeting. I knock on doors and clothes I pay for myself, Alderwoman Schwitzner says. Kirchner is adamant he never spoke at such meetings or ever campaigned in his uniform. An attorney for Kirchner says there's more about the audio of that January 22nd meeting that will be released at a later date. Wow, what is going on in the St. Louis Sheriff's Department? Here again, you had a situation where there was a lot of arguing and discontent between the outgoing sheriff, Vernon Betts, and the incoming sheriff, Alfred Montgomery. They had years long of disagreement. As I said, Vernon Betts, the outgoing sheriff, had fired Alfred Montgomery years ago when he was an acting sheriff under Vernon Betts. He runs for election this past fall, and he beats Vernon Betts out of the sheriff's position. Then Montgomery decided that he was going to let go of at least a dozen to 2 dozen currently working sheriffs by the time he took office this past January. Mind you, we already have an understaffing and not having enough sheriffs, and I think that Alfred Montgomery is definitely starting off on the wrong foot. He got rid of at least a dozen or 2 dozen long-term sheriffs. Then he has this issue with this sheriff that has been there for 12 years in Mr. Kirchner, and has let him go under auspicious circumstances. Then you had this situation where the sheriff's department allegedly detained the city jail commissioner, Tammy Ross, under an allegation that one of the sheriffs had assaulted a female detainee, which he cannot detain. That's against the law for the sheriff's department to detain the city jail commissioner. They don't police the jail, and that is beyond their scope of their job. What in the world is going on with our city jail? This sounds almost as crazy as what's going on in Fulton County Jail in Atlanta, Georgia. At this particular time, and of course we had several people that have died in the jail. There's been a couple of riots over the last year in the city jail. And at this time, there may be notice, or we need to put on notice that the mayor, Tashara Jones, needs to take a look at what's going on in the St. Louis City Jail, let alone maybe the governor and also the FBI. There is a lot of stuff going on in our city jail, starting at the top with Alfred Montgomery. And if any of these allegations are true, and there's an audio of him having Kirchner roll dice in order to keep his job, Alfred Montgomery, who just started being the new sheriff in January, may not be there very long. There's a lot of gamemanship being played, a lot of immaturity. If this dice rolling issue really took place, that is not what an adult and a person in a leadership role should be doing, definitely in relationship to someone's career and their job. And these are jobs that are taken very seriously. It's all under the umbrella of public safety. And if this is going on in our St. Louis City Jail, this is just a microcosm of what is going on in our city politics and our city government oversight. This is unfortunate. Tell me what you think about this situation with our sheriff's department in St. Louis, Missouri. This has been the Trevor Donald Experience. Manifest your truth.